Live streaming is on.
Wow.
All right, we are live on Monero Talk with Harry Halpin. Harry is the CEO of NYM Technologies. It's a company that's making decentralized, incentivized mixnet technology. He formerly worked on standards around cryptography and decentralized social media at W3C. Which is a topic we should probably talk about today, given Jack Dorsey's recent tweets. So we can talk about that a little bit.
Oh, definitely.
And what else? Harry used to work or do research, I guess, at MIT, where I believe he worked alongside Tim Berners-Lee. Is that correct?
Yeah, I used to be the person that handled the cryptography API in the browser that ran in JavaScript.
Very cool. And I'm sure there's many other things I didn't mention. I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention.
No, it's very accurate. So
we actually met at Magical Crypto Conference. I don't know if you remember. You came on very briefly on the show on Monero Talk live at the Magical Crypto Conference last year, and you briefly discussed NYM. And I recently saw your last, I believe it was your last talk. And I thought it was great, and I thought it'd be good to have you back on to kind of get an update on what's going on with NYM, and then just talk about cryptography and crypto-anarchism in general. So
yeah,
thanks
so
for
I
coming
mean,
on.
I've always had a huge respect for the Monero community because I think there's a lot of understanding in the community. This is what I said at the Magical Crypto Conference, that privacy is not. There's no single magic trick that gives you complete privacy. It's a kind of long running, almost I would say, battle or war, where there's different strategies and there's different tactics that you use. For example, you might use ring signatures, you might use ZK snarks on the chain, confidential transactions, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're focused on at NYM is we're focused on the kind of network level. And I'm actually very happy with the Monero community because I think the Monero community is one of the few communities that did call out this problem quite early on with all the work on I2P and Kovri. And I've used the Monero wallet. It's one of the few desktop wallets that if you follow enough instructions, you can get working with Tor. And our goal as a company is basically we're trying to make a very, very even more powerful than Tor, at least for cryptocurrency, privacy enhanced layer on the network level that can then interoperate with, for example, cryptocurrencies like Monero. And even if Monero does some fundamental change, such as an upgrade to Atlantis, we would still support their kind of layer zero privacy. And I think that's really important because it's like building, if you're building a house or you're building a castle or anything, you need to build it on very solid foundations. And it seems like while there's tons of focus on the chain itself, that the actual foundations are the network level, the TCP/IP broadcast, the packets themselves, the layer zero, as some people call it. And so, that's what we believe is the most useful thing for us to focus on. And it's the most useful thing that we have, I think, to give to the wider community in terms of kind of making real this long-standing vision of privacy enhanced, sovereign, and autonomous digital currency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of feedback there. I don't know if it's from your microphone.
Oh, might be.
I think perhaps let me know if you agree or disagree. One of the reasons maybe it's been not really on the radar as much or perhaps overlooked is because cryptocurrency, what's so great about it is the incentive system that's built into it. So everybody's going out there, they're getting rich. They mine their Bitcoin at basically zero, and now it's worth $10,000. So in the midst of that, there's really been no kind of monetization engine of technology for decentralizing things on the network level. But my understanding is NYM is looking into that solution, and perhaps that's why it's been overlooked to this point in terms of
there's a lot of really interesting cypherpunk history here. So it's been a long-standing dream since David Chaum invented mixnets to make sort of network level privacy a reality. And the closest that we got after there was some early work on mixnets around the cypherpunk mailing list, these cypherpunk remailers, such as Mixminion, Mixmaster, but these were all focused on email, and there was no kind of really incentive structure. So what actually happened, and I think this actually happened to Adam Back, is that he was running this anonymous email remailer. So you would send an email and it would get broadcast anonymously out. But the thing is, if you open up an anonymous node, as Adam discovered, you just get covered with traffic. All sorts of people will start sending anonymous messages out, spam essentially. And this is the 90s. And as part of an attempt to prevent all of this spam and this overload, Adam started working on Hashcash, which is essentially what Bitcoin does for mining, solving these hash puzzles in order to prove that you're expending some energy, some electrical bill, which then would cost something and therefore kind of prevent spam. And then Tor came around immediately after that. Some of the people that were working on Mixmaster, like Nick Mathewson, teamed up with Roger Dingeldine and Paul Syverson from the U.S. Naval Lab, and they created Tor. And Tor is actually, to be very honest, it's an open source project. It's quite good at what it does, which is it anonymizes network level. And I've encouraged folks like the Mimblewimble people to use it. I use it when I use the Monero wallet because it's currently the best we have. But there's this huge philosophical difference between what we believe is possible and what Tor believes is possible. Tor believes that essentially you shouldn't use incentives on the network level, or you shouldn't use incentives at all. That if you use incentives, then what could be considered adversarial behavior, dropping packets, not forwarding them, corrupting them, then becomes rational. You might make money by doing adversarial behavior. So Tor, when it was kind of coming out about 20 years ago at this point, decided it was going to focus on this altruistic model where everyone would just volunteer, and I'm a Tor relay. I send packets. I get packets from people, and I send them onwards, and I don't get rewarded at all. There's no incentives. I'm not making any money. I just feel good about myself, and I'm part of a larger community of other people. And that's actually, I think, what is interesting about Tor is that has shown itself to work to a certain extent. There are currently, 6,000 some Tor nodes, 8,000, somewhere in that space. But if you look at Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, there's, I think, at least conservatively 20 to 30,000 nodes. And if you start looking at the geographical dispersion of Tor nodes, it's mostly in the developed world. It's traffic coming in from the United States, going over to Germany or in Europe, and then getting shipped back to access Silicon Valley websites inside the United States. And I think what that shows is that altruism works, but it doesn't really favor a huge population. The people who can afford to be altruistic are people in developed countries like the United States or Germany who can give away some server space to help people be free online. And I think we should appreciate those people. They do a wonderful job, and they have a lot to lose. Recently, last year or 2 years ago in Europe, the Bavarian police raided a friend of ours, Moritz, who was actually working a bit on mixnets with us, because he was running a Tor services. He's running Tor exit nodes. And so they got his IP address, and they said, okay, you're doing some sketchy stuff with Tor. Some people are using your software for sketchy purposes. So we're going to raid your apartment. So what then Moritz get for running Tor? Well, he got a legal bill, right? So, and this is good. And some people want to do this, and they should do this. But then on the other hand, if you look at like the wider Bitcoin community, the wider Monero community, you see tons of interest from China, Indonesia, Latin America. And these are places where, Africa, these are places where people, I don't think, have enough resources, to be honest, to altruistically, hand over computers to be used to anonymize network traffic that they don't know about. But what we've discovered is that if you give people an ability to basically get some monetary reward and set up an incentive structure which isn't immediately hackable by some adversary, then people get super excited and they are like completely willing to run nodes and take risk. And then from the money that they get as rewards, they can even pay for those nodes, pay for that software, and even pay for some of the legal risk involved. And we think that has a huge potential, which for some reason has never actually been thoroughly looked at. And there's some interesting cryptocurrency projects in the space that have kind of gone this direction. Loki, for example, based on I2P, Orchid, which is kind of looking at VPNs. There's a few projects in the space. Hopper, which is this kind of pay by hop system. But we're kind of old cypherpunk kind of people, and we looked at mixnets. And we looked at mixnets for a very good reason. Mixnets historically can handle what's called global passive adversaries. So Tor or VPNs or I2P or any of these systems are great if your enemy can't observe the entire network. It's kind of security by obscurity. If the enemy can only observe maybe the entry points or the exit points, but they can't observe both at the same time, then you're okay. However, as we know from the NSA and as we know from Chainalysis, and these capabilities, it's cheaper and cheaper to record network traffic. There are adversaries that can observe all the nodes in network, all the routers, all the IXPs, the inputs and the outputs of every network transaction. And they can use machine learning, artificial intelligence, to do kind of complex statistical correlation attacks to discover patterns of traffic that are the same even if they're coming out of one IP address and going into another. And in order to defeat that, you have to do a few things that at least our version of mixnets do, which is you have to hold traffic, delay timing, and if there's not enough traffic in the system, you have to add fake traffic, dummy traffic, or cover traffic to the network. And the thing is, this is, not infeasible, but it's not cheap. It's real infrastructure. A mixed node, running a mixed node as compared to like a Tor relay or an I2P node is going to be more work. You're going to be dealing with more traffic, creating fake traffic. You don't have enough traffic, delaying traffic. And we think that this is actually a perfect opportunity to try out an incentive system. Because I think what Tor hasn't really caught up on quite yet, although maybe we're being too...
Tor didn't really have that option at the time, obviously, as well. Bitcoin wasn't invented yet.
Exactly.
What would the incentive system even have been?
Exactly. And also with Tor is they've already created, even today, they can't just switch over to a Tor coin because effectively they've already built this community around this altruistic way of shipping traffic around and this whole technical design. But if we're going to have an alternative design for message-based traffic that's really focused on sending lots of fake traffic around and timing delays, this is a perfect opportunity for us to take all of those lessons that we've learned from Bitcoin, Monero, Zcash, Ethereum, all of these lessons around incentive structures and really try to apply them to this really outstanding problem that affects every single cryptocurrency, and not just cryptocurrencies, but actually every single network application, which is how can we defend the network level against mass surveillance. So I think it's a great fit. We've been working on it really hard. We have a long-standing good relationship, I would say, with Roger from Tor and a lot of people from the Tor project. And they are, willing to put up with us. Are
they involved in the project?
We ask for advice. So, for example, when we were doing our economics, trying to understand how much we had to pay servers, we would ask Roger from Tor, the founder of Tor, how much he thinks it costs to pay for servers in different jurisdictions. And a lot of the research that people from the Tor community have done, we're kind of repurposing in a mixnet framework. So, for example, recently, Ian Goldberg, a famous cypherpunk professor behind off-the-record messaging, invented a new technique where the network map, the topology of the entire network, no matter how big the network gets, can be kind of downloaded in constant time, constant size. And we hung out with Ian 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we are going to use the same technique in our software. So I think that there is a lot to learn from. And, in Tor and mixnets and I2P, they're on some level a bit complementary insofar as what Tor is specialized at and what VPNs are kind of specialized for, but Tor is to a large extent better, is that they're good at streaming traffic that's TCP/IP-based traffic for like web browsing. So if your entire JavaScript applet doesn't download, you got to do this kind of SYN ACK, this acknowledgement SYN receive, so you get your entire JavaScript package, and then you can run the web page. And this is what it's going to be very hard to beat Tor at. However, cryptocurrency traffic is message-based. There's a message that's, a broadcast that's going to chain. It's currently TCP/IP, but a lot of the stuff also on UDP is very message-based. If the traffic doesn't get through, you just let it drop and you just resend. You don't have to have this kind of sender and acknowledgement back and forth that you typically see with TCP/IP. And this kind of traffic, cryptocurrency traffic, Tor doesn't even want. If you ask people from the Tor project, they're like, this actually doesn't really fit our threat model really well. It's not the kind of traffic we were designed to send. And so they're actually quite happy that we as another project, as NYM, are going to work on this kind of traffic and blend this with the other kinds of traffic that isn't really web browsing, but is nonetheless important kinds of traffic. So
very important.
So you have not only you have cryptocurrency, but you also have, for example, instant messaging. For example, one of the first people to look at our project was Moxie from Signal. You have, for example, any kind of traffic where even video, voice IP, audio IP that's very lossy, where you can just lose a lot of packets. This actually could work perhaps under a mixnet model. And we really want our mixnet to support different kinds of traffic, because if our mixnet was only used by Monero people, we love Monero, but there's probably not enough users, and we don't want using NYM plus Monero to be a sort of giant sign that, oh, look, they might be doing something a bit dodgy. We would like as many different kinds of people using the software as possible. That's a lesson we've learned from Tor. So we really want Signal. We really want Status. We really want any kinds of messaging apps, WhatsApp, Telegram. We don't care. We would like all of these kinds of messaging apps, which maybe there's not really good money in these apps. It's very hard to monetize them. But by virtue of sending traffic through our network, it would provide cover traffic and a larger set of people using our system, a larger anonymity set, a bigger crowd for all of the people who were using Monero or other cryptocurrencies. So that's on some level why we're trying to build a very open-ended and generic system, because we don't think we can even predict the kinds of applications and kinds of users that we really want very high network level privacy against really powerful adversaries. But the more of them that get together, the better for us. And also the better for the nodes. The more money, cryptocurrency, the people who actually run the NYM mixed nodes would make, the more traffic that comes through.
So just for general understanding, so it sounds like the initial use case would be for things like we're saying broadcasting Monero transactions or sending instant messages. But then does NYM have the ability to then scale to become like a Tor and handle general P2P traffic? Is that then become possible? Because it sounds like initially that's not possible, right?
Yeah, so there's, I think NYM in the long run can definitely, well, in the short run, it can handle normal peer-to-peer traffic, the kinds that you would use, for example, with BitTorrent. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, but of course, I think the question is the kinds of traffic that come along with, for example, video streaming, where you really expect the video stream to actually be pretty lossless. This or heavy JavaScript web pages, this will be more difficult. And the reason is pretty simple. One of the ways that we provide anonymity on a very high level, higher than Tor, is we use this packet format called the Sphinx packet format. It's a kind of authenticated packet format. So you kind of hop by hop kind of peel off the layers of where the next hop is, but that the body itself is encrypted using what's called a wide block cipher. It's a very nice packet format. It's also used by Lightning Network. But one of the difficulties with this packet format is even though every time you use the packet, in between each hop, it's unlinkable to the previous hop, unlike Tor, it achieves that unlinkability due to using asymmetric crypto. So an asymmetric crypto, as we all know, is a little bit slower. So I think we can definitely scale to handle anything where you have a few seconds delay is okay. But really want to get it down to a few milliseconds, it'd be very hard to support as many asymmetric crypto operations as Sphinx currently has. You'd have to move more into the symmetric space. But you might sacrifice possibly a little bit of privacy for higher speed. That's an open research problem we're working on. We're working on it with some of the good people from Brave and other projects. The most important thing, though, to remember about a mixnet is that we do have this one really nice advantage in terms of scaling, which is that if there's very few people sending cryptocurrency transactions over a mixnet, how do you disguise them? How do you give them a larger amount of privacy? Particularly if they don't maybe send transactions that often. Well, you have to make a lot of dummy traffic, a lot of fake traffic between nodes.
And
now,
this is just you're talking about for the early days of NYM and in order to create the anonymity set.
Yeah, because you might not have that many users, so you really got to work pretty hard to make them actually anonymous. But the more users you get, the more people that are actually mixing together, the less dummy traffic you have to produce. So interestingly enough, the network scales really well. And actually, you get better privacy and faster, generally, latency, the more people use the network. So that's, I think, a really big advantage we have. And, we're trying to develop a system where we can, every kind of epoch or period of time with our network, we say, so yeah, and like, let's look at, if this is actually a very good exercise. If you look at Bitcoin, why do you have this difficulty level, this threshold that the hashing power kind of keep up with the threshold, the number of zeros in your puzzle. And this threshold is there because you really want a block to be kind of mined every 10 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of the same. We would like every packet that comes into our network to have a minimum anonymity set. Maybe let's say it has to be anonymous among 10,000 other possible users. And then we also we can kind of each round, we see how much traffic's coming in. We have to see how much mixing we have to do to produce this anonymity set. And for this anonymity set, which we measure using entropy, we can then kind of fine tune the network every period of time. We can say, oh, well, we really want everyone to be anonymous between 10,000 other users, but we only have 9,000 in our anonymity set for this round. So we need to change the network a bit to add, basically we can say we want to add some more cover traffic, slow the traffic down to try to increase the anonymity. Now, if we have too much traffic coming in, we can say, great, where everyone is, maybe they're anonymous in a set of 20,000 or 100,000, but the network's slowing down. It doesn't have enough capacity to handle all this traffic coming in. So then we have to add new nodes to the network to handle this traffic. And of course, because we're a decentralized system, we don't run those nodes ourselves. We say just as you have in Bitcoin mining, you have a kind of a block reward, right? So we have what we call a mixed mining reward. And this mixed mining reward, which is a bit like a mining reward, but it's based on mixing rather than mining, increases if the capacity increases and we need more nodes to meet the demand. So we need to basically increase the supply. And then we kind of keep increasing the supply while trying to maintain the anonymity of the entire network, keeping that good for everybody. And so it's kind of a balancing act. And what our system is trying to do is we basically try to maintain this balance continuously just like Bitcoin tries to maintain the mining rewards and the block production schedule.
Can you talk a little bit more exactly, I guess? So there's going to be, there'll be a NYM coin, I guess, right? Because that's going to be the...
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need some measure of accounting to understand the capacity of the system. Okay, there's just no way around that. So if you index your capacity to an external whatever currency, then if there's like an attack or inflation of that currency, then you screw your system up. That being said, we're not doing like a staking pure proof of stake coin or anything like this because one thing we really like about Monero and Bitcoin is that there's an external energy source. There's some external thing you're attaching yourself to, and that's really what's giving that some extent value. And so in Bitcoin, it's mining, and NYM, it's mixing. So we basically want to really tie the rewards to a concrete action. In terms of a separate coin, to be honest, there's enough cryptocurrencies out there. So we don't currently envision ourselves being used as any kind of digital cash. Like I said, it's a unit of counting for the system. And what we imagine will happen is that people will send whatever they actually already have cash in, such as Monero, for example, through our system. And just as there's a small transaction fee that you can increase, you want faster service with Bitcoin, we'll have a small NYM fee, which will be kind of taken off and then used to kind of feed the incentive pool for the mixed nodes. And this will be indexed to the capacity, which will then be denominated in a NYM coin effectively. So the users of NYM will be paying essentially to use the service, and that's what will be essentially paying that. In an ideal case, yes. We think transaction fees that are very small, like perhaps 5 basis points, 50 basis points, are, I think, understandable for given the high value that privacy provides the transaction. And that's really what we think in the long run will fuel the system. That being said, we also understand people don't like paying for things, particularly if the system's new, particularly in those kinds of services that you might not want to pay for, or you might want no one to pay for. For example, let's say you're running a whistleblowing service. You want to enable the next Snowden. You've set up a whistleblower's account box using a mixnet, using this very, let's say, clever technique called single-use reply blocks. And you would like to be able to deposit and pick up messages from the sort of mailbox in the mixnet. Realistically, people aren't going to pay for that. Ditto, messaging. Do you really think Signal messages will be paid per Signal message? Probably not. Or Telegram messages? It's hard to believe. So for this, we have a different model. And this currently, we actually have 2 different models. In one model, let's say you're Telegram. Telegram would like to enable greater privacy for its users. But unlike Monero, Telegram's a company. There's this guy who's in charge who has a bank account, probably somewhere in the Caymans. And what he can do is he can basically purchase an amount of capacity and lock it and say, I've paid for this and this is free for anyone that uses my service. So he basically locks up a certain amount of capacity for his service. And that's, I think, reasonable, right? He may not be able to get his users to pay, but it might be worthwhile for him to pay or his company to pay for using that service. That being said, a lot of people, if you look at the whistleblowing use case, you look at these sort of nonprofit use cases, people, they don't want to pay. They may not have the ability to pay. And so this is where we really want to reward people for essentially using the system and participating. And one way we can do that is we can say, well, if you have some tokens, you can, of course, delegate it to someone else, and you can lock them up as well. And if you lock them up, then you're saying, I'm dedicated to the system, I'm locking these up, and this gives you some free bandwidth as well. So, I have some tokens, maybe, let's say the Electronic Freedom Frontier Foundation wants to support, mixnet Dropbox 2.0, which isn't really a cryptocurrency service. It's something, to use for whistleblowers. And so the Electronic Freedom Frontier Foundation would just essentially get a large amount of tokens, possibly donated, which is indexed a certain amount of capacity in the network, and lock those up. And just by virtue of locking those up and not, dumping them on some whatever, trying to throw them around, they would get a certain amount of free capacity every sort of epoch or month. And so I think we can support all three kinds of use cases. Use cases where there's some really pay-to-play service where they really want, users may not pay, but the service really wants privacy. We could support kind of more nonprofit use cases where we don't expect anyone to pay, but they can invest enough in the system, particularly early on, and then hold those tokens and keep getting free service. And cryptocurrency use cases which are high value enough where you might want to pay just a little bit to make that transaction private.
Yeah, cryptocurrencies seem like the perfect early adopter. So where is NYM currently at?
Currently we basically, you can go to our GitHub repo. We're currently in Go. We have all of our repos in Go, and they work. We have an alpha testnet. You can actually send cryptocurrency transactions in it. You can basically, in order to kind of access the network, we have a kind of token faucet you can use to get free tokens and convert them to credentials, or you can just use the mixnet. Right now, we keep it open. And currently, we're running our own kind of private testnet, and we're opening a more public-facing one. It's still very alpha. At the Chaos Computer Congress in Germany in December. We'll be demoing it there. We have a lot of very interesting community members, including some Monero community members who've decided to help us run mixed nodes. And we will hopefully produce some sort of test blocks and see if the network can hold traffic. But what we've discovered, and we do want the community to know this, is that we've done about a year's worth of work in Go, and while we do have all the basics working, we discovered there was a essentially 10x speed up, sometimes up to 15x speed up, using C++ and Rust, in particular Rust around the crypto. So we will be migrating all the components to Rust, and I think we'll do another testnet release probably in a few months with a pure Rust testnet.
Okay. So when do you see it actually being used, like mainnet, cryptocurrencies actually starting to use it to broadcast transactions? Is that in the near
definitely
future?
Next year.
Definitely next year. Okay.
Yeah, definitely next year. We've already made, like I said, we did all the conceptual work this year. We got essentially a Go proof of concept out the door. We've got community interest in running nodes, but now we really want to kind of speed it up, optimize it, really make it an kind of real world software. And I would see us pushing us out by sometime between I would say another testnet in the spring, and then hopefully mainnet over the summer into the fall would be our ideal schedule. Things may fall a season or so behind, but I don't really see them falling behind 2020. Has some really kind of monster coders on it. So,
have you been communicating with the Monero community at all, particularly folks like Lee Claggett, that's working on, kind of trying to integrate these solutions on the network level?
We need to communicate better. We've mostly been talking to Josh, who gave a talk on network level anemone at MoneroCon last year. He's been following our work pretty closely, and Zach Hamilton, who's working on Monero a bit. But yeah, we should definitely talk more to Lee. I mean, to be honest, we're not diehard members of the Monero community. We're network level privacy kinds of people, researchers. That's what we're focused on. So we're still kind of understanding the community. We actually got a bit, we're like, what's Kovri? Where are they with I2P? I use Monero Wallet. I use with Tor. When are they going to support I2P? We're still trying to understand kind of how the Monero community approaches network level anonymity. But we don't tell people, oh, don't use something else, use us. When the Mimblewimble guys approached us, and I said, look, you guys definitely need a network level anonymity because they have this interactive step in their protocol, unlike Monero. We recommended you need something right now, guys. So don't wait 6 months. Use Tor now. That's literally what I told Daniel and other folks from Mimblewimble. And so I think the same with Monero. Monero should try out as many things as possible, and trust us. We'll definitely want to get in touch with you and other folks when we're ready. And we hope you can try us as well. And we hope we can build a really strong community, because the crazy thing with cryptocurrency, which I've always found really shocking, is we really still, to this day, it's kind of amazing. When you talk to people, and my good friend Amir Taki brings this up constantly, when you talk to Monero people, they really get the vision of cryptocurrency. You go to some other communities and people are like, oh, we're here to build, decentralized finance products, or we're here to build, we're gonna do a DAO. And it's all very nice stuff. I mean, it may have uses, but fact of the matter is we still don't have a decentralized marketplace and privacy enhanced cryptocurrencies. And these are like basic requirements that were very clear, that we need to have a currency that is not supported and is not does not require a nation state or bank, and it needs to maintain the fundamental privacy of the sovereign user. And until we have that, I honestly think it's better to focus on that vision and work on that rather than all the other crazy things we see people work on. Although people can work on whatever they want, but from our perspective, it seems a little bit odd that there's actually been less work on privacy than you would expect. And then we've seen all this interest in ZK snarks and the many follow-ups, and the math is really cutting edge and nice. We completely agree that there's fundamentally wonderful cryptographic research being made there, but people get incredibly confused about privacy. Privacy is not, there is no magic silver bullet. There will be no, when I was at MIT, I was shared an office with Madars, who wrote the original libsnarks, the thing which Zcash used originally for ZK snarks, and none of this is perfect. It's always going to keep evolving. But privacy is fundamentally a holistic property of a system. It involves not just what's on chain. It involves the network level. It involves the user interface. It involves what the applications, for example, the marketplace, are sending back and forth. It's a huge problem, and it's not impossible to solve. But it requires a kind of larger viewpoint and more nuanced thinking than a kind of, a fetish, to just really make a fetish out of like a particular new mathematical construct, because these come out constantly.
Yeah, I mean, one common thesis on this show is always that, the idea that the crypto that best lives up to the ideals of crypto anarchy is probably the cryptocurrency that you should most be paying attention to. The one that's really trying to live up to those ideals. I see really for two reasons. One, because, that's what we're here for. That's what this tech was invented for, to be digital cash. At least that's my belief. And two, I believe that's really what the value proposition of the tech is. So if you're striving to achieve those goals, then you're striving to build a product that this stuff was actually invented to do. So that's kind of a constant theme on this show. So question being, do you agree with that? And if so, which cryptocurrency do you think is doing the best job at that, at kind of living up to those ideals?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I'm not interested in blockchain for supply chain management, or blockchain for diamond-backed assets or something. That's ridiculous. I'm interested in privacy enhanced, decentralized digital cash. That's the vision that existed before Satoshi Nakamoto, and that's the vision that will continue to exist, and we have to build the software that makes that a reality. In terms of the actual existing cryptocurrencies, the only privacy-enhanced cryptocurrency I've ever actually used to do real transactions has been Monero. So, for example, this is actually a great use case. Recently in Iraq, there was lots of protests against the government. I had a lot of friends there. We were communicating, and the government was successfully blocking Tor. Tor couldn't just keep on, possibly due to lack of incentive structure, couldn't just keep throwing up new nodes. They were being blocked very effectively. And we needed to basically build these kind of censorship-resistant VPN tunnels to get people, these protesters against the kind of corrupt Iraqi regimes, they could communicate to the outside world, because people were being shot, the video wasn't getting out. Very hard situation on the ground by some very brave young people. And, there's very few places that will let you get a server, let you buy server space anonymously. But you have great people like Peter Sunda from the Pirate Bay has a startup called Najala. It's some crazy, maybe Danish or Scandinavian word of some sort. But, you could use Monero to buy these VPN services. And I gave some tutorials to friends there about, and it was a pain. I love Monero, but trust Monero desktop wallet, getting it working with Tor and then actually like downloading the chain and people could do it. And it worked. And they were able to buy VPN servers that they could then use to get data out of Iraq. That being said, it was hard, but also very much to Monero's credit in terms of the ideal, but also in terms of the code, it was the only privacy-enhanced cryptocurrency that anyone could actually buy anything with, including server space. And I think that's been my experience. And I think I also, I do think that the kind of crypto-anarchist roots of Monero, I think have a lot going for them. And I think a lot of other large projects, Ethereum, for example, I definitely would call out on this one, have run a real danger of losing track of the actual kind of cipher anarchist vision. Or a lot of people just, I'm just going to build a blockchain for a bank, or a blockchain for a nation state, or a blockchain for Facebook, and these people, they're losing the original motivation and vision. And it is shocking, because the amount of money which has been wasted, the amount of talent which has, I think, been wasted pursuing these other projects when the very basic bread and butter issues aren't solved is astounding. That being said, we still have a lot of resources as an active, growing community, and as more and more people come online, and I don't think internet censorship is going to go down. I don't think bank collapse is going to go down. I would be shocked if there wasn't a major sovereign bank crisis in 2020. I would be shocked if internet censorship just didn't go up like this. And so this is where, censorship resistant, peer-to-peer, decentralized digital cash, which is privacy enhanced because surveillance capabilities are also going up like this, is going to be much more a matter of life and death in the future. I think we can even imagine today from where we stand. And the future may be coming at us much quicker than we expect.
Yeah, I've heard in one of your talks, you described it very well, talking about the early days of the internet. Obviously, you're an expert in this field, and the concept you were expressing was basically that in the early days of the internet, there was kind of this crossroads where we could have became more privacy preserving and building the technology into the protocols at the time. But that didn't happen for various reasons. And now I feel like we're at that crossroads again. So we've Bitcoin has been invented. It's great, but it seemed, in my opinion, is lacking some of the fundamentals of what we need it to be. And we're kind of at this crossroads where we need to decide which protocol is really going to be the value transfer protocol for the future. And it's like right back the early days of the internet, where the right choice needs to be made, so that we make sure the one that wins, the one that gets the network effect, or at least it's up there and it's not forgotten, that we create, implement a protocol that will have those privacy features built into it. And like, we're at that crossroads right now. I mean, so do you agree with that? And do you think we're going to make the right choice here?
We have too many protocols for on-chain transactions. By on-chain, I mean Zcash, Monero, Zcoin, Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, but I'm still waiting for Schnorr signatures, and all this stuff. And we have very little work on the network level. And at some point, people need to stop fighting, I think, about what's happening on chain, make some concrete protocol choices. I would honestly, really kind of, you need to standardize the minimal possible standards for privacy enhanced digital cash and really stick to that. And then build the ecosystem out around it, which is, I think, where we're really lacking. So I used to work for the W3C on web standards. And with the web, it's like people didn't standardize, everything. They didn't standardize, how to buy things online, really. That was one of the reasons why we have Bitcoin. But they did standardize HTTP URLs like www.example.org or Monero Talk. And they did standardize HTML. And this kind of minimal standardization level led to this huge explosion of innovation once people agreed enough that the different kind of silos could talk to each other. And there's a lot of work on interchain communication. Maybe it'll pan out, maybe it won't. That being said, I think I would like to see people really focus on the actual ecosystem, just make some hard decisions on the protocol level. The protocols should evolve, but they should evolve once they're standardized and accepted more slowly than the rest of the other components. And then this entire ecosystem, the ability to create things like censorship-resistant, privacy-enhanced messaging apps, privacy-enhanced marketplaces, things that really users can actually really understand and want and use. I think will really build the core of the next internet. And I do think that core will have a large amount of blockchain technology in it. I'm very hopeful. I think the initial internet at this point has gone really off the rails. I mean, you've seen it with everything from DRM and the web, where the web is now constantly more and more pay to play, a few big monopolies running everything. You see it with the historical internet governance bodies, like ICANN selling off the .org to some firm for $1 billion. And, we need these decentralized replacements for digital cash and a few other core components working really fast. Because otherwise, I don't think we can really expect the rest of the core to survive much longer. And that's a danger, because we need the internet to survive at this point, as both as individuals and kind of as a species. I would like to mention, the Jack Dorsey tweet you mentioned earlier is interesting. It's one of the sort of a wake up call that a website as powerful as Twitter is seriously engaging in decentralization. And I used to work on decentralized social media before getting involved in cryptocurrency. We're trying to get Google we're talking to Twitter. I actually recruited Twitter to the W3C to work on this, and they didn't end up sending anyone. And the problem we had with the traditional web standards bodies is, even though they were open to a large extent, and people could get involved, in order to actually make real changes, you basically had to beg Google for permission. You say, "Oh, Google, will you just do this to the browser, et cetera, et cetera? Will you, for example, use the new, enable curve 25519 in TLS?" And maybe Microsoft won't, but maybe Google will. There was only a few browser vendors that really controlled the user experience on the web, and also to control the kind of fundamental building blocks that people could innovate with. And at a certain point I said, well, look, why am I working here? If I was really wanting to work on, DRM for Netflix, I would just work for Netflix or work for Google and get paid more. And there's nothing exciting that could be done. But with the blockchain space, it's still wide open. And it was really interesting, Jack Dorsey, because Jack Dorsey, I think, is historically a bit of an anarchist. At least know he was a bike messenger before he got hired to Twitter by my old friend Evan. And the early versions of Twitter actually did support a level of decentralization. And you could ask Blaine Cook, first CTO of Twitter, who's a good friend, about this, that it supported a sort of XMPP-based decentralization. Decentralization uses this kind of old-fashioned XML-based format. But the problem with these kinds of formats, and these are also the kinds of formats that I tried to start standardizing at W3C, leading to stuff like ActivityPub, which then led to Mastodon and these other federated services, is the problem with these kinds of approaches that they don't have strong cryptography and they don't have true decentralization. So their mental model is still, everyone runs their own server. And I run a server. I run a few, but I don't expect most people to run a server. That being said, and if I'm not running my own server, why would I trust you on another server with my data? So a lot of these early attempts to decentralize the web failed, I think, because they were very, I would say, too focused on the server side and on this federation landscape. And the engineers were never really, I think, serious about actually solving the problems. But Jack Dorsey is interesting because Jack Dorsey seems to be pointing to a real kind of using strong cryptography, using some kind of blockchain, and actually decentralizing Twitter. And if he's actually planning on doing that, I think he might be deep in his heart enough of a crypto-anarchist to pull it off. I would be super, super pleased to support that effort. It's a real, these ideas which are very fringe are now really going mainstream.
Do you think he really is a crypto-anarchist at heart?
I've never met him. I've met most other people from early Twitter, and I think he, like I said, from what I've heard, he's deep down, I think he's still a bit of a punk rocker, let's say. Maybe not a hardcore crypto-anarchist, but and I think it's a great sign that he's up for this.
Definitely. Yeah, I want to push you on that a little bit more. So like I said, in the early days of the internet, we were at that crossroads. So do you think there possibly is, pushing the Bitcoin agenda? Is it potentially irresponsible given that where Bitcoin currently is at? I mean, it's currently ossifying as a protocol that doesn't have privacy built into it. I feel like it's kind of a replay of the early days of the internet here. And we have people that are out there saying, Bitcoin's great. We all have to use Bitcoin. But is it pushing us potentially in the wrong direction? And we should really be focusing more on projects like Monero or trying to turn Bitcoin into Monero, if that is at all possible at this stage.
I mean, I have a lot of respect, in particular for Adam Back and Blockstream, and we've been trying to engage the Lightning community about using mixnets, and they've been very receptive. So I don't think it's game over for Bitcoin. That being said, like I said earlier, I've been waiting for Schnorr signatures for a very, very long time. So at some point, folks really have to deliver this next generation privacy level on top of Bitcoin, or it will be another cryptocurrency that will do it. And I would say that the Monero community is one of the most active communities and has probably the best chance of any other privacy enhanced cryptocurrency of pulling it off. I do think currently the momentum and the money is in Bitcoin, but the development, it's the problem is when you release something, you can't, it's very hard to change it once it's really in the wild in a decentralized system. This is kind of a negative side effect. And so I think what the Monero community, even though to a lot of maybe, people, it seems very, hackery, but by keeping iterating the fundamental design rapidly, being very open to new designs, I still think has a lot of promise because that shows it's still very flexible. Like it's a young tree that you can still bend. And so I do think that, if Blockstream can pull it off, there will. I wouldn't discount Bitcoin possibly becoming a giant, privacy enhanced cryptocurrency, but it is really hard. And so I think the fundamental question is actually is not really Bitcoin versus Monero, but assuming that Bitcoin can never really pull off privacy except maybe as a side chain or whatnot. Do we see the world big enough for really two cryptocurrencies? One which is a transparent one, and transparency has a lot of value. A lot of transactions we want transparency in. Transparency for the powerful and privacy for the weak. Privacy for the rest of us, those of us who aren't, a king or a government or part of the 1%, so to speak. And maybe Monero will be that privacy enhanced cryptocurrency. I would say of all the privacy enhanced cryptocurrencies I've seen, it's the one with the most active user community, the one I've actually seen accepted, and the ones that software actually works. And that's really nice. And it's still young enough, the community is still flexible enough that it doesn't seem rigid to me. There's not,
Hello. Oh, did we lose him? All right, hopefully he comes back. All right, hang on, guys. I think I'm still on, but we lost him. I'm going to refresh for a second. All right, hopefully we get Harry back. Had a few more questions here.
apologies, the internet died.
All right, you're back. I thought we lost you.
Yeah, no, the internet died. But what I was saying is, I haven't seen too much cult-like behavior inside Monero, so I think that's a good sign.
I think I had heard you mention meeting with Julian Assange at one point, or I don't know if you've had various meetings with him, but I'd love to hear more about that and whether or not, were there any conversations regarding, I'm sure there were, regarding Bitcoin and things like Monero. I've read some of his, I forget the name of the book that I had read of his, that basically it was an interview of him and a few other crypto anarchists. And it really opened my eyes at the time to what the true value proposition of this stuff was. And they talked quite a bit about Bitcoin. I believe the interviews took place in like 2010. And they talked about, even then, the realization that it certainly is not private enough. But yeah, I would just be curious, did you ever have conversations with him regarding these issues?
Yeah, so I visited Assange a few times in the Ecuadorian embassy. I consider him a friend. He's a very, I would say, if you've only seen sort of media reports on him, what doesn't really come across very well is how genuinely warm and funny and very intelligent and considerate he actually is as a human. And he definitely was, we definitely discussed cryptocurrency. I think people underestimate how absolutely isolated he felt, and that he was I think he felt very abandoned a lot, particularly over the last few years. And I would say to him, I said, Assange, you really should engage the cryptocurrency community more, because they haven't forgotten about you. They haven't stabbed you in the back like some of your former friends. And they have a lot of the same ideals of you. And then what I said is, you also remember that this is really a world historical turning point with the advent of cryptocurrency becoming a sort of huge phenomenon. Even though it seems crazy and was to a large extent crazy, the ICO buzz brought in tons of money, of which some can be converted into political power, into the hands of essentially, cypherpunks. And that hasn't happened before. That's a real game changer. And the other real game changer is that you have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even, hundreds of thousands of young people online dealing with cryptocurrency, learning about cryptography. And this is a new generation of hackers that has tremendous technical power, and enough technical power that they really can change the world. And that's what I think Assange was most interested in. I mean, in terms of cryptocurrency itself, I don't actually think that, it was really funny. His lawyers would approach me and they said, well, look, can we do some fundraising among these cryptocurrency people because we're having trouble paying all of his legal bills? And I said, that's impossible. He got so much cryptocurrency in early on. How is it possible that he's spent it all? And I'm sure Assange has money squirreled away in all sorts of weird places. But nonetheless, I think, to be honest, you have to remember he went into the embassy years and years before 2016. And therefore, he probably spent most of his cryptocurrency paying his legal bills in those early days because, the Visa account was blocked. His other sources of money were blocked. And so I think that Assange and WikiLeaks in general were very interested in cryptocurrency, are still very interested in engaging the cryptocurrency community more, especially because it's now really much, particularly over the next few months, do or die time around the Assange case. And I think Assange, more than anyone else, really saw, if you look at this early book, Cypherpunks, where he was discussing kind of freedom, future of the internet. He saw back in 2013, if we could only replace DNS with something more decentralized, something, if we could, he had a real political and technical vision around the future of the entire globe. And he basically, push comes to shove, a lot of people are very critical of him, but he is a defender of human freedom, who, unlike many people who are, keyboard warriors who are more than happy to just tweet about stuff from behind in the safety of their home, really put his own personal well-being at risk to defend his ideals and try to create a system, a technical system which embodied those ideals, which was WikiLeaks. And so I think it's very important the cryptocurrency community not abandon him. It's very important that it's actually important to realize that he doesn't just have a gazillion dollars of Bitcoin lying around, that his legal support team does need support, and that he is a genuinely, is a human being and should be kept in touch with what's going on in the crypto community space. I believe on the Support Assange website, they tell you how you can write him letters in Belmarsh prison. It's very hard to visit him. And I think of all of the people, he's definitely not, I would say, dead and gone. He's very much alive, has a decent chance of getting out of prison, even with the latest UK elections. There's a decent chance that if his case goes into appeals, just like the Lori Love case, another hacker that they're trying to extradite to the United States, and that extradition failed, that Assange might have his extradition not accepted by the UK government, and he might be able to become a free man again. And so I think we should support these people because they really are, I think, some of the earlier and clearest thinkers of our political vision. And we should continue to evolve their vision. For example, I think, it would be wonderful. I don't have the time or wherewithal to do this, but someone should create, a more decentralized WikiLeaks. That would be wonderful. Or the current WikiLeaks software, with Assange's blessing, could become more decentralized. This more resilient against attack. This would be wonderful. And so it's all these things that people can do technically, people can do socially. and we can do to further develop a lot of his thinking, and a lot of the thinking of the cypherpunk movement. Yeah, the situation is quite tragic, but I really do think he'll get out, and I have a lot of hope in that. He'll either get out or the UK government will drive him to suicide. I think one of these two things will happen.
Yeah, I encourage anyone who hasn't to read that book. I'm getting a little feedback here. The cypherpunk book. It was, I believe he was interviewed in it along with a few other cypherpunks at the time. And yeah, like I said, there was some really, as you know, really good discussion about Bitcoin itself and about the importance of it. Basically, what really stuck out for me was when they spoke about, mass surveillance is one thing where, if they know, if they're surveilling you on Facebook and they know, what your likes are and who your friends are is one thing, but knowing how you spend your money and knowing every transaction is a whole nother level of potential surveillance, and the ability to control people. And he really kind of opened my eyes to that concept. And he was talking about Bitcoin at the time. And even then, like I said, the understanding that, well, Bitcoin is great, but it may lack this feature of privacy, which is critical to what we need to be doing with cryptocurrency.
Yeah, the name of the book is Cypherpunks, Freedom in the Future of the Internet, which is interviews with him and Jake Applebaum and Jeremy Zimmerman, who I saw recently in London. And yeah, it's a great book. It's Julian, to some extent, I think, comes out most clearly in dialogue. And since the book is effectively a transcript of his dialogues, it's worth reading. Also, when Google met WikiLeaks, which is his dialogue with Eric Schmidt and some other folks, is also a quite interesting book. And I think with Bitcoin, I didn't use it when it first came out, precisely because of these privacy problems. It was kind of intuitively obvious that my background is not actually in cryptography. My PhD is in machine learning. And, it was kind of intuitively obvious to myself, even back in 2011, even though I feel like a bit of a moron for not investing, that, and it was sort of like funny money at the time. I mean, you just send it around. It was valueless almost. That that privacy was going to be a big issue for Bitcoin. But that being said, a lot of very good fundamental work has happened. And so I think that the next thing to do is to implement that work and put it into production as soon as possible. There is a fundamental tension with privacy and decentralization. And this really goes back, and maybe this is a very important point to kind of ponder, which is that the old cypherpunk motto, which I brought up, was transparency for the powerful and privacy for the weak, which is currently not what we have. Currently, the very powerful, the central banks themselves, are effectively unaccountable. People, the hyper rich can hide money wherever they want in the world, covered up by lawyers and protected by laws. And so while they're unaccountable, the rest of us, the weak, our every single move is monitored by our smartphones, our every email through Gmail, our every like on Facebook. And this is absolutely insane. And I don't want to add that my every financial transaction on Bitcoin is just another data point to be absorbed by another multinational corporation or government and used to monitor and possibly even attempt to control me. That's incredibly dangerous. So in order to really reverse this dynamic, we need to create privacy-enhanced tools for the weak. But the problem is that in order to keep those tools decentralized, there needs to be some measure of transparency. It's hard in decentralized systems to keep everything completely private and unknown due to Sybil attacks, due to the inability to really, in Zcash, figure out the nullifier set. All these other issues will keep coming up and up. And I think it's more about striking a balance so that people who want absolute privacy, 100% anonymity can have that, and that the people that run the infrastructure have to be to some extent a bit transparent about how they're running the infrastructure. And so the way I view is that the users and the users' financial transactions should be private, should be able to selectively disclose by themselves to who they choose to disclose it to, in a way which, of course, is compliant with whatever set of laws that they choose to comply with. And the people that run the infrastructure should not be able to distinguish or discriminate any of the network traffic that users are sending through the system, and that the good behavior, the people who are running the infrastructure, should be transparent. And that is the goal, which we'll be able to ship everyone a white paper fairly shortly on, of NYM is. In the NYM system, the mixed nodes themselves have to prove that they fairly mix the traffic, that they're not dropping traffic, that they're not discriminating against traffic, that they're sending everyone's network traffic through fairly, and that the users themselves can have absolute privacy, and then they can selectively disclose to whoever and whatever they want, only what they want. And so that you have privacy by design and by default. And that means that the infrastructure operators themselves have to be transparent, but the users get complete privacy. And I think that's the right balance. And that's the balance that we're aiming at. I think a lot of the Monero community is aiming at. I also think, it's sort of the balance that Tor ended up striking, that WikiLeaks ended up striking. So in WikiLeaks, the leaking system itself tried, at least at various points, to be as transparent as possible while keeping the leakers anonymous. And it's a good pattern. And we just need to see more people use that pattern, because without transparency, there will always be some kind of corruption with power. No human being can resist that. And we need cryptographic code to bind human beings to prevent them from gaining too much power over others. But that being said, we need to respect the fundamental rights of ordinary users to have absolute privacy. And that if people would say, oh, we can't have privacy, people will do bad things. Maybe they'll, buy something I don't want them to buy. They'll read something I don't think they should be allowed to read. And that being said, it is true. Terrible things can happen due to privacy. But I am a strong believer that the long arc of history, as you say it, tends towards human progress, towards humans gaining greater freedom, and that freedom is for the greater common good, and that is something that privacy enhances. I do not see the big threat in the next 100 years to human freedom coming from privacy enhancing technologies, coming from encrypted text messages, or coming from privacy enhanced cryptocurrency. I see the great threat to human freedom and to progress and to the ability to live a free life coming from out of control governments, unaccountable central banks, economic collapses caused by those very same governments and central banks, corrupt multinational corporations who, are plundering the planet and causing tremendous amounts of harm, and no one can do anything about it. And this is where I think the real danger comes from, and thus we have to have these kinds of alternatives to enable people to fight back. It's really there's no other alternative right now. We can't trust anyone else to do it but ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a story as old as human civilization itself. Whenever a new technology is invented, there are those that believe it will ultimately be used for bad, and those that realize that overall, as long as you believe that the good in humanity outweighs the evil, that it will be used for progress. Just like the printing press, the internet, the automobile, any other breakthrough technology we've had, and something like Bitcoin and Monero it's very easy to filter out and point to the potential nefarious use cases. But ultimately, if it's bringing more freedom and liberty to the world, especially in a time when we're all moving into a digital realm, I think it's pretty hard to argue against. It's kind of like arguing against democracy when we first invented that. Is my quick take on that.
Yeah, and I think we and our little the company NYM is based in a very small town in Switzerland called Neuchâtel, and it was really fascinating. I went into the local library, and there was a sort of exhibit that people forget. Less than 500 years ago, people who like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, these kind of early philosophers were talking about human freedom, human dignity, that there should be a social contract between the government and the people, that humans are effectively inherently good, and that society and the educational system is what causes, to a large extent, problems. And they were driven from France to Neuchâtel. Neuchâtel actually had to grant Rousseau honorary citizenship, and that there was a huge underground printing press, network of printing presses that were literally, had to smuggle books from Switzerland into France by basically shipping them across a lake in a boat. And that, that while the printing presses were being destroyed by the monarchs and their army and other places, kind of high up in the Swiss mountains, the kind of more anarchist printmakers were still pushing out these pamphlets and disguising them and smuggling them to the rest of the world. And I honestly think that's sort of what's happening today with crypto anarchy, that even though the rest of the world outside of the kind of rarefied circles of Monero and Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptocurrency community is engaging in these increasingly difficult political struggles, we have something which is really of value, this kind of crypto anarchist thinking that we can help spread. And we need to get these thoughts out there, and we need to use the power of cryptography to defend ourselves and to keep the production of this knowledge, this to a large extent code, going on. And I think, just as I'm sure in the kind of very end of the Middle Ages, things were looking very dark to people that believed the printing press could bring good to people, that everyone should be able to have knowledge, to read, to have free thought, and that eventually that this individual free thought would lead to destruction of monarchies and to new forms of democracy. This was a crazy little minority of people who were literally persecuted, had to flee, and people went to jail, were killed, and barely kept their operations running, would run out of money, would be oppressed. And we're going to be in the same situation. But if we continue doing this, I am confident, because I don't see any other game plan out there which makes sense in the current kind of technical and political climate. I'm pretty confident we'll be able to succeed.
And the best part is we get to print money as we do it.
Yes, that is. One thing I said that was the genius of cryptocurrency. So if you look at previous revolutionary movements, they always had a problem with money. They had to be funded by some other nation state, either often the Soviet Union or the United States. They had to rob banks, and why would you do any of that if you can literally just create your own money out of not out of thin air, but out of your own community? Is the community of people that use Monero, that like Monero, that trade in Monero, that really give Monero its value. That's the kind of social basis of Monero, the real foundation, and that's something which has never, I can't think of, it's never happened on a global scale before within human history, and that's profoundly heartening. That not only can you basically build the code, but unlike the original kind of free software hackers who essentially had to either starve to death or work for a big corporation, people can make enough money by being part of these communities, that they don't have to sell out, that they don't have to give up, they can stay true to their ideals. And this financial power gives us a huge lever, which I think even Assange and many other people didn't quite understand, and we ourselves are only really beginning to understand.
Harry, this conversation has been amazing, so much to the point where I have been able to mention my sponsors. I just want to quickly mention them.
Go for it. Yeah, I think you've gone on too long. So
no, this is great. Cake Wallet. Cake Wallet is the premier iOS wallet. If you're looking to get into Monero and you own an iPhone, we always recommend Cake Wallet on this show. Our other sponsor is xmr.to. It's the easiest way to seamlessly exchange Monero into Bitcoin without any KYC AML. It's xmr.to. Harry, I guess, we've gone quite some time. I don't know if you want to mention one last thing, the coconut credential scheme. I know that's something else that's part of this. I thought that was an interesting part of the project as well. Is that something you want to quickly mention?
Yeah, I'll mention it as well. So, I mean, Coconut is one implementation. It's a particular anonymous aggregate signature scheme. But I think what's really important for you to remember is that the cypherpunks didn't only give us cryptocurrency. There's a lot of focus on other things, mixnets being one of them, but another being an interesting technology called anonymous authentication credentials. So you see a lot of talk about digital identity nowadays. Everyone have a digital identity. And to be honest, this is, I think, very fascist. It's very dangerous. The people that give us identities are traditionally governments. And, identity, an ID card, a passport, can really be used to track you, to nail you down, to limit the range of things that you're allowed to do. For example, crossing borders. Anonymous authentication credentials sort of use cryptography to sort of say, I can prove I'm 18. I can prove I'm American. I can prove I own possession of a key. I can prove that I paid this amount of Monero to someone else. And they can embed this in this kind of compact form. And the real problem with anonymous credentials, particularly those that were put forward by David Chaum and many other people early on and followed up in software like, what did Brands work on again? Microsoft Passport was even some version of this ages ago. The real problem with all of this kind of software is that it was always centralized. It was always kind of a centralized manager running these anonymous credentials. And even today, when you look at anonymous credentials being used in the wild, there's a very nice formalism called algebraic max. And that Signal has just released a few days ago the fact that the Signal group messaging protocol will use anonymous credentials to kind of manage the group using algebraic max. But these are inherently centralized protocols. Even if the centralized authority doesn't know anything about the data being sent back and forth, it only verifies that's either part of the group or a valid transaction. And they may not know the amount, or they may not know who sent it to the merchant or whatever, as you saw with like Chowbungaman eCash. And anonymous credentials are on some level more generic than digital currency and heavily underexplored. And they've been stuck, including the version of anonymous credentials used by Signal, and with centralized issuers and centralized verification. So a friend of mine, George Denises, who was working with NYM, but unfortunately joined the dark side of the force and went to work for Libra, was working on a new scheme. I was working on with algebraic max, and he decided to do this new scheme called Coconut, which we're now making more flexible and changing ourselves as well. And that this scheme is essentially a decentralized anonymous authentication credential. So, and that's an amazing piece of technology. It's like when I go to a bar in the United States, because it's a bit fascist, I have to show someone my ID. And, and they can see not only that I'm over 18, they can see all this other stuff about me. And so anonymous authentication credentials are very cypherpunk insofar as they allow you to selectively disclose only to who you want what you want. So we use them inside NYM to basically be a kind of right of use voucher. So if you've paid for a transaction, the fact that you've paid for a transaction, or that someone has paid for you, or someone has locked up tokens for you, this is shown by an anonymous authentication credential, which is then verified and issued in a decentralized way. And it's a very powerful piece of technology that I think is kind of one of the kind of underappreciated gems of the cypherpunk movement. And we're picking it up. We use in this very special place inside the NYM mixnet as a kind of right to use voucher, where I think Snowden even said this in Web3. It's a kind of a credential that says, I have the right to be here, I've paid, and you don't need to know anything else about me. And we think it's really powerful tech and very flexible, and it can eventually be used in lots of other use cases. And even though a lot of the researchers that were working on it are unfortunately now stolen from us to Libra, the technology itself should be picked back up by ourselves and hopefully others and explored a lot. I think it makes a lot more sense than these other digital identity schemes I've seen being thrown around, such as Sovereign or W3C DIDs, these other schemes, which to me, honestly, seem a bit garbage or nonsense. You don't want to put your identity on a chain. You don't want to put identity documents on a chain. You don't want to put keys on a chain. This is all crazy talk. It violates privacy. You leak a lot of data. Credentials should be only used and should only be shown to those who need to see them. And we can do all of the identity stuff, which I consider more to be authentication, the credentialing systems, could probably all be done off chain, and that can support a number of really useful use cases for things that you really do need to do on chain, such as maintain the balances in digital cash. So it's a really fabulous technology. We have a few Medium blog posts on it. We have a paper coming out, and the Coconut paper itself is wonderful and online and available as well.
Yeah, that does seem like another ingredient or pillar to what we need as as we move into this digital realm, and as we kind of try to opt out of the nation state, so to speak, and into this new nation of the internet. We have our own currency, and then we have our own ability to ID each other. Do you see there being any other major pillars that are necessary? Obviously, also the ability, something like NYM, the ability to have the entire internet itself be built in such a way that you can anonymously interact online. Are there any other missing pillars, things that need to be worked on in the crypto-anarchist struggle here? What are some of the other big ones?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's a whole world of applications that haven't been explored. Some very straightforward things, like we don't have any usable markets. We don't have many of the very basics for cryptocurrency and nice user-friendly apps. But let's also think back a bit, right? Let's look at the other structures. On the internet level, NYM is really good at making traffic anonymous, but we also need mesh networking. We need, as we saw in Hong Kong and other places, and Iran recently, there's a lot of increasingly internet shutdowns, and people need to be able to establish internet autonomously without maybe connection to the larger backbone. And that will require something we still don't have today, which is easy to use an effective mesh networking. And then there's a huge range of applications and technology which no one's working on, which would be needed to replace the nation state. If we wanted to decentralize every bit of a nation state, we'd have to, I've been to places which are war zones, and, you do have to repair the roads. Does that require a nation state? No, of course not. But you do need to have the ability to decentrally plan things, decentrally organize things, and in a decentralized fashion, basically do decision making in an effective fashion. We have a lot of, very difficult problems involving, attacks, both not just like computer security, but like physical security. For example, in the future, there will probably be a lot more drone activity, a lot more drone strikes. How do we deal with these? There's all sorts of really hard technical problems and very basic stuff like the production of food, that I really think the open source, decentralized, free software, crypto-anarchist movement really could help and find solutions to these problems. And this is going to require something that's a bit more serious than I think the ICO hype that, of course, collapsed. It's going to require really thinking a lot of these core technologies that were developed in the context of digital cash and moving them over. And this will require a lot of communication between, crypto anarchists and relatively comfortable places like Europe or the United States with people in South America, people in Venezuela, people in Mexico, people in Kurdistan, people in Iraq, people in Algeria. And I think we can build these links in these communities, and we can, there's 1 billion people on the planet. As a large amount of disenfranchised people become more educated, more competent with programming, more technically savvy. And as you see, the kind of rulers of the world are currently not particularly good at technology. They barely understand what Bitcoin is, definitely don't understand what Monero is. I think we have a fighting chance to develop these kinds of core infrastructure pieces. We're doing NYM because it's the thing that we know how to build. We think we could build better than anyone else, and we've thought about the problem for years. And so we feel confident doing that. But then I hope that there's other groups out there who are working on privacy-enhanced digital cash, that are working on mesh networking, that are working on open source food production, that are working on counter surveillance and all these other topics, which I think are actually end up in the large scope of things to be just as, if not more important than what we're working on.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Harry. That was the entire interview was amazing. I appreciate all your insights. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for the invitation. I've listened to quite a few Monero Talk interviews in the past. It's an honor to be invited.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. Hope to have you on again in the future. We will be broadcasting. You said you're going to the conference in Germany. I'm not going to be there, but I'm going to have somebody there, and we're going to be interviewing people in the Monero space. So that should be fun as well. Maybe we'll catch you there as well.
Yeah, we'll have a lot members of the team there, and I would love if you want to do interviews with other folks. That would be great, and they can talk about things. We've already talked enough about NYM, but there'll be many other topics and many other cool projects at Chaos Computer Congress. So
awesome, man! Thank you again. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Be in touch. Bye.